What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguised Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin. I am your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro, 2 underscores, A-N-T. In tonight's episode, we are going to dive into the framework of building the ideal Buffalo Bills draft in terms of positions of need or roles that potentially need to be upgrading, players to keep an eye on within each round that fall into those buckets based on skill set and fit and scheme fit and potential in terms of who they are as a person, culturally, all those types of things. We're going to do a deep dive through the first 3 rounds, then take a peek into day 3 from rounds 4 and on. Really kind of preparing you folks for who you need to watch for, what positions you need to keep an eye on, and all that good stuff to really get you ready and raring to go for the NFL draft, which is pretty much 4 weeks away at this point. It's come on like a banshee, and it's an exciting time, and I'm excited for my guest on tonight's show. It's somebody who I've never had on the show before, but whose work I tremendously respect. He is the host of Locked On Bills and the host of Locked On NFL Scouting, Mr. Joe Marino. Joe, you're a busy man. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Anthony, good to be on with you, man. Those are some cool nuggets about the podcast with the blueberries and the numbers and all that. That's really cool.
It's that's the important stuff here. Like, the football stuff is meaningless. It's all about what do you say in your intro? What kind of garland do I put on my little Christmas?
Man, you got some stuff going on. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. You need to incentivize the viewer.
Right.
And I think that's what it is. Nobody cares about the football stuff or the Bills stuff. They want to know what kind of garland you got going on the tree. Is there an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin? All that, you host a podcast.
It sounds like I need to make some changes, my guy. I mean, everything's very much the same all the time for me. I never update the background. I don't have any trees. You say the same thing at the beginning every time. I got work to do.
You're doing it wrong. Like, I don't want to tell you how to do your job.
I'm glad you invited me on your podcast to inform me of these things. I've embraced a growth mindset. You know what I mean? And we're gonna attack this and get better. We're gonna get better tomorrow.
This was less draft talk and more kind of like an intervention. I wanted to just bring you here and just But you had a good head on your shoulders. I appreciate how you're taking this feedback. So this will make this a lot easier. So I feel like we're already bridging the gap here. But I am sincerely very excited to have you on the show. With your work is held in high regard by myself, and I would say pretty much anyone that comes across it. I've literally had people in my stream here, like at different times, like I'll be talking about somebody draft related or even somebody Bills related, and somebody will come in the comments and be like, Joe Marino said like this in his podcast this week. I'm like, well, there you go. Like, yeah, your work is highly respected and rightfully so with everything you put into it. And so I'm very excited to walk on this journey with you in terms of building the ideal Buffalo Bills draft. And first thing I want to ask you in doing this for this episode, what was your kind of like your core driving factor in how you put together what like ideally the Bills draft looks like for you? Did you have like a certain core theme you were going to? Was it position based? Was it availability and value based? Like, what was kind of your central thesis or kind of driving force in terms of how you put everything together?
I think availability and value are 2 good buzzwords that would describe my thought process here. But if I could make it even more simple, I want to address the stuff on this team that makes me nervous, right? That's really where my mind is at. There's things on this roster right now that I don't think are good enough. And there's some short-term concerns. There's some long-term concerns. And everything that I have to bring to the table tonight addresses those things that make me nervous. And so that's really the theme of what I'm prepared to talk about today.
When you look at addressing things that concern you in 2023, but then also obviously going forward, how do you balance that? Because I think that's a very real thing in terms of draft preparation for NFL GMs and coaches. Like, you're trying to get better right now in the immediate future, but you're also trying to set yourself up for the future. How much, like, how did you try and balance that in terms of, what you brought to the table tonight?
I think just being realistic about projecting certain players forward, whether it's an expiring contract for a key player. Think about Gabe Davis, obviously an important player as the wide receiver too. Can the Bills realistically give him a market value deal? maybe not. You got some other guys on expiring contracts at wide receiver. So I just kind of that forward thinking. Defensive tackle, nobody's signed beyond this year, while I also think it's upgradable right now. Huge hole at middle linebacker. Is Spencer Brown at right tackle upgradable, right? So these are the things that are burning on my mind. And so it's thinking about right now, but also projecting things forward. And I think you can strike that balance. You can thread that needle and achieve both things.
I also want to know how, so, you know, speaking for myself, in really diving into this, I thought it would be, I've grinded a ton of tape on more prospects than I feel like any regular person, well, aside from yourself, probably should. But I thought this would be like, I've got certain guys that I love and certain guys based on positions that from a skill set standpoint that I value, from a fit standpoint, I think fit the bills. And then in terms of kind of analyzing like, okay, this person should be available here at 27, this person or this group of guys tiered wise could be available at 59 and 91 and all that. But in actually like going through and putting pen to paper and laying down like official things, I found this to be decently tough, like especially with addressing certain positions like linebacker for one. I found that to be kind of a pain point if you're not addressing it early on in the draft with what you're finding later. And based on what you do in round one, I found the round 3 pick at 91 being a bit of a pain point. Like if you didn't address linebacker there, I felt like as I went forward, I kind of got almost like handcuffed into certain areas, which I don't want to do. And I don't think any team wants to do. You don't want to be in a spot where like, okay, well, we have to take player A at this position because we need this position. That's not how you maximize value. Did you have any like pain points or anything that kind of, you know, hung you up on, or you got hung up on a little bit as you went through this?
I hope that I'm appropriately attributing credit, but I think Chris Trapasso at some point in the last week put something on the Twitter timeline about Brandon Beane and his ability to kind of identify talent cliffs. And I think that a lot of what Brandon Beane prioritizes and what Chris was communicating, I think is what you're talking about. And that, well, if you want to get a certain position, you better do it here because it ain't going to happen later. And so, yes, I that absolutely came into play. And so a lot of my thoughts here take into consideration those talent cliffs, scarcity of players that I think can actually be upgrades and fit roles. And that dictated a lot of how I prioritize certain positions, because I don't want to get into it, have the conversation before the conversation, but for certain positions, if you don't do it early, it ain't going to happen later. But there's other positions that are needs that I think you can address later, even though maybe they're more important. It's just really, it's about understanding the talent pool. You have to, right? Because you could sit there and say, well, the Bills can get a replacement for Tremaine Edmonds in the 3rd round. I don't think they can, you know, or if they can't, they can get a meaningful receiver, right? Everyone thinks they need a upgraded receiver. Well, what if I told you that didn't have to happen with pick 27? What if I told you that playing the waiting game at receiver has worked out for a lot of teams, and maybe the Bills should this year? So we'll get more specific with that, but I'm picking up what you're laying down there.
Yeah, and that's such a good. I appreciate the way you picked that up. It's such an interesting conversation because I think so. Again, not to spoil anything, but you take a position like linebacker, something that I continuously see on Twitter. Not that Twitter should be taken as the Bible, especially for something like player evaluation, but I see so many comments that are just like, oh, you can get, this guy in the 3rd round, or like this guy in the 4th round. And so many of those guys that are listed, like, I don't think like you recognize what the scheme fit is or what that player actually is in terms of what they can do and what they're good at and what their skill set pushes them towards in terms of what would make them successful in the NFL. And I feel like a lot of times people see the name or you see the flash or you see the highlights and it's like, oh, well, you can just go with this guy. And it really doesn't narrow down into what a player's actual skill set is or what the actual fit is. Or that drop off of a cliff for like a tier at a position where it's like, you know, maybe this isn't the best value right now, but if we don't go with this here, we're going to pay for it later because what we're grabbing later isn't going to match up.
You know, Anthony, something that I think is important and is along the lines of what you're talking about is you could go through this exercise and you could say, okay, well, the Bills need a whatever, it doesn't matter, a wide receiver. And maybe you think that there's 10 receivers that make sense for the Bills. And you're like, okay, if they get one of these 10 in your mind, it's going to take care of the issue. Well, here's the reality of that. These are real human beings. And the reality is, even if you gave that same list of 10 to Brandon Beane, he might say 4 or 5 of them was like, we're not touching that dude. We don't like that person.
Fair.
And I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time around prospects over the last several years, right? Like extended periods of time. And there are people that I'm around that I would say, not a chance. There's no chance I'm drafting you. You're a good football player, but I don't like the way that you are as a person. And I'm not going to invest my resources into you, right? And like, that might sound a little harsh, but that's reality. And like, if you're a general manager in the NFL, dude, I would be so tough on these guys.
Oh, absolutely.
I would like, if we don't vibe, if I don't like your charisma, the way that you carry yourself, like, I'm not picking you. It ain't gonna happen. And so think about this from a quarterback's perspective. Let's pretend that we're the Indianapolis Colts right now, and you're going to get that third quarterback. Let's live in a world where the Colts are going to get the third quarterback. You think that they like 3 quarterbacks? Probably not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You might only like 1 quarterback. And if you're Houston and you don't get the guy that you want at 2, because the Panthers take him at 1, you're not going to pick a guy just to pick a guy because the internet thinks that there's 4 starting quarterbacks in this draft. You don't like these human beings, right? There's a good chance of that.
Yeah.
We got to keep that in mind.
And that's such that team liking fit piece from the non on the field perspective is so important. I mean, we saw, not that Kyrie Elam didn't have good tape or didn't present on the field things, but how much did we hear last year about how impressed they were with Kyrie Elam meeting him at the combine, and he brought his own binder, and they were impressed with Kyrie Elam, the person, and how he talked about how he prepares and how he studies the game. And that's something that a lot of the time we're not privy to, but that's something that goes a long way, because that mental side, at a certain point, the higher you go, I mean, you even see it in college, but once you get into the NFL, by and large, everybody's big, everybody's fast, everybody's good at football, like everybody's strong, like everybody like works out. But there's, what's your drive? Why do you love football? Is it for like the joy you get on the field? Is it something mental? Is it for fame and status? Like, how hard are you really going to work? How do you see the game? How do you understand the game? Like, how do you as a person fit what we're trying to do as a team? And that goes so much more beyond the tape and beyond the measurables and the combine stats. And that a lot of times is what attracts teams to a guy, because that it can be what can separate that guy from being meh to okay, from okay to good, and good to great, and great to a Hall of Famer. Like that mental side and who you are.
Yeah.
And that's why those top 30 visits and the combine interviews and everything, it really goes a long way. And that's what also makes it like it throws another, wrench into the mix in terms of being another variable that when we're sitting here going like, okay, this guy really fits, like in terms of, just making it up, like for any team, like, oh, this corner, he plays a lot of the coverages and works in the structures that this team uses a lot. Okay. He exhibits the traits and the skill set, but you know what? I see this flash, and maybe him as a person doesn't fit what this team wants to do. And that might take him completely off the board. And even from an X's and O's perspective, you're like, boom, that's the guy. But when you get the off the field pieces, it goes a long way. And
well, how do you know how somebody who's in their early 20s, 21, 22, 23 years old, is going to respond where they have more money and more free time than they've ever had in their entire life?
Yep.
You tell me how to figure that out. Well, that's what we're talking about, right? And that's why, like I said, you got a list of 10 receivers that you like. Say, Brandon Beane, go get one of those. He's probably going to cut that list in half and say, these 5 guys we're not touching.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like everybody, I think it gets said before. I don't think people really take it home. Like, think about what your mental state was at 20, 21, 22. Brother. And now imagine you're super famous and you've got a ton of money. Like, what does that do to you? How responsible were you as an adult towards your profession or as a person in your early 20s? And now dial everything up to 100 and like imagine what what comes along that way. Morning Mine, appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for the super chat and the kind words. She says, great show, guys, and equally great points about personality. How interesting. Yeah, it's a huge piece in terms of what I think that also, kind of like the last piece on before we really dive in. I feel like that goes into, people always talk about like a player who doesn't work out, and it's like, oh, well, it's the coaching staff, or it's the, he wasn't good enough this, he wasn't fast enough. Or sometimes it's just that mental makeup. Like maybe they didn't have the drive to really go after and get it, or maybe their head was in the wrong spot and they didn't really put that work. Like, and you see that a lot from guys that are reclamation projects. They talk about like, all of a sudden things clicked for me and I changed the way I approached the game or saw the game. And excellent point. And again, just another tricky variable.
One more point on this, and this is something that Jordan Palmer has said to me on a couple of occasions, and it's about quarterbacks, but I think it applies to any position. And this goes back to what you were saying. Like, all these guys are big, strong, fast. They're good. They're good football players, but teams bust players more than players bust teams, right? The turnover in the NFL is insane. Whether it's general managers, position coaches, my goodness, right? Coordinators, head coaches, they're turned over all the time. And let's say that you're a player right now and you're drafted to the Atlanta Falcons, right? We can all recognize the Atlanta Falcons are in a make or break year for Arthur Smith and their general manager, whose name is not coming to my mind right now. What is his name?
I wanted to say Dimitrov, but I know it's not.
No, dude, I can't believe I can't think of his name right now. The Falcons GMs, I'm blanking.
Terry Fontenot.
Thank you.
Yep.
Those guys are done if they don't win this year. And you get drafted by the Falcons this year, and they have these guys have a specific plan for you. But the new GM and the new head coach, they didn't pick you.
They're not attached to you. They don't care.
So all of a sudden you're trying to make it work, potentially round peg, square hole. Doesn't work out there. Now you're on another team. The next thing you know, you've had 4 position coaches in 5 years, 6 different offensive coordinators. No wonder you didn't work out. Like, how important was it for the Bills to have Brian Dable with Josh Allen for the first 4 years of his career? Meanwhile, Josh Rosen, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, they all have like a million different coordinators and people around them. No wonder they didn't work out. And Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, the 2 guys that had stability, right, with their coaching staff, actually became good players. That stuff matters too.
And even with people who want to knock on Greg Roman so much, like, at the very least, like, the Ravens literally catered an entire side of the ball to Lamar Jackson. They did everything they could besides give him, weapons at times and really lean into that other part of the conversation, but they tried to insulate him, as the Bills did with Allen. And that's a great point. Like, you get, not to say that if you dropped Baker or Darnold or Rosen into the Bills or Ravens or whatever, and they would have been just as great, but it's that whole nature versus nurture argument, and it looms large in every decision. And it loomed large for us, I'm assuming, as we made our selections. So, Joe, we're going to start in round 1. Now, again, we're building the ideal Buffalo Bills draft. We're going to go in depth with rounds 1, 2, and 3, and then talk some high level for rounds 4 and on. So talk about your round 1. Did you have a particular player, you were sitting there going, because again, we're trying to marry, for everybody listening, the idea of, realism mixed with ideal. Like, if you think the Bills need an edge, we're not going to sit here and be like, ideally Will Anderson falls to 27 and the Bills get him. No, that's not happening. We're trying to base this in realism. So how did you go about thinking about this round 1? Was it positional based? Was it player based that you just think is great value and you can't pass up? How'd you go about this round 1, and who did you land on?
Going back to what I said at the beginning of this, I think about what I'm nervous about, and what I'm most nervous about right now is linebacker. And Tremaine Edmonds is no longer on this football team, and the Bills have done nothing to add a new player to the position group. And so with my concern that I have at linebacker, combined with, I only think that there's 2 guys in this draft class that can come in and be good starting Mike linebackers, right? I'm looking at this through the lens of Tyrel Dodson / Terrell Bernard. And okay, who do I think can be better than them? There's 2 guys, Jack Campbell from Iowa, Drew Sanders from Arkansas.
Okay.
There's nobody else at linebacker that passes the are they better than Terrell Bernard test for me, especially because Bernard's got that 1 year, right, of time on task. And so, you could pick somebody in the 3rd round that maybe one day will be better than Terrell Bernard, but will they ever be able to make up for the 1 year that Terrell Bernard has ahead of them? That's something that I have questions about, especially when you're looking at the Diane Henleys of the world or the Marvian Overshones. They're like the same player.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point? You already like Terrell Bernard. You vetted him out. Dave Aranda told you he was awesome, right? Like, you've already done that. I don't need another player like that. I don't need to compound my issues by having another player just like him. I need somebody better. And maybe there's other positions that are premiums or whatever you want to get into, but the fact that this team right now is staring at Terrell Bernard / Tyrel Dodson at linebacker, that pushes me into linebacker as my primary focus for the 1st round right now. And I center in on, I think the player that best fits the Bills is Jack Campbell out of Iowa. I really do. I'd have him over Drew Sanders.
So I'm in a similar spot with you. So my long-standing ideal fit or player to drop to 27 for the longest time has been Darnell Wright, right tackle from Tennessee. And part of it is I still think Spencer Brown's ceiling is there. And I think it is a very justifiable thing to explain why his growth may have been stunted these first 2 years. Again, we all know 8-man football, Northern Iowa, opts out of the COVID year. And then last year, he's hurt in the offseason. He's hurt through camp in the preseason. He's hurt in the season. And this is a guy who needed, great phrasing from you that I love. He needed time on task. He needs reps. He needs experience. Literally, like every day missed of practice reps in any way, shape, or form hurts and hinders him potentially reaching that ceiling. But for whatever the reason, at this point right now, I still find him to be very, very, very mercurial as a player. That roller coaster there's too many high highs and too many low lows. I liked Wright before the Senior Bowl. Then I went to the Senior Bowl. I thought he had a good week. But when I spoke to him, and so this ties into something we were talking about earlier in the intro here. When I spoke to him after day one of practice, I asked him, I asked him several questions, but one of the questions was, how does he go about film preparation and study for the weekend? He talked about how he studies edge rushers and he likes to put them in buckets based on their rush style. And then he'll go that week and practice against those different kinds of styles and study what he needs to do in preparation for how he prepares. And so I was like, okay, you've got this big athletic grizzly bear who I thought approached the game in a very professional manner. And I was like, he's got the physical. He's got to clean up some physical pieces, right? Like his hand placement isn't always ideal. And sometimes he's a little too far out in front of his feet. But so for the longest time, that's been my pick. And so I've kind of given two answers here. So he's like my ideal, right? But on the flip side, as I talked about earlier, going past this point, once I picked Darnell Wright, and then I was like, okay, let me lay out what round 2 looks like in round 3. There's no option really to get a linebacker that fits if you're not taking one in round 1. And that's why my other like probable option is Jack Campbell. I'm in a similar boat with you. And I think from a size standpoint, an athleticism standpoint, I think he mitigates the loss of Tremaine Edmonds to a degree. You'll watch him, he can spot drop, but he also picks up some guys in match coverage, whether it's slot or tight ends. He can mirror a little bit with those guys coming out of the backfield or with tight ends as well. He diagnoses well in the box. I think he's the most natural archetype fit in terms of, skill set, scheme fit, based on what Tremaine Edmonds did. And if you're trying to mitigate that loss, and a lot of it, again, like I don't think going linebacker in round 1 is the best use of value. And I want to get your take on this as well. I don't think it's the best use of value, but the drop off from that cliff is so severe. Like, because Jack Campbell isn't lasting to 59. Drew Sanders isn't lasting to 59. If you like Trenton Simpson, I don't think he's going to last to 59 either. And then you're looking at, are you really want to go with Overshone or Deion Henley or Dorian Williams, who a lot of those guys are more overhang apex linebacker hybrid guys that get used a lot that are going to need time on task to get to the level you need them at? And then are they even better than Terrell Bernard? Like, so do you even go redundant with that type of pick? It muddies the whole waters if you don't go linebacker in round 1. And so I don't love necessarily the value of it, but I do think Jack Campbell's a good player. And I think given the drop off after him, it really is like the safest kind of pick.
Yeah, listen, I understand the offensive tackle conversation. I really do. If you look at the Bills on offense, the most upgradable position is right tackle, and it's a premium position. And I think that there's going to be a really good offensive tackle that the Bills could pick at number 27. I don't know if it'll be Darnell Wright, but it could be Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse, Anton Harrison, Oklahoma. Yeah. I don't know if one of the Ohio State kids drops there. I certainly don't think Broderick Jones gets there. Peter Skoronski. There's a lot of names, right? So somebody, I think, well worth pick 27 at a premium position like offensive tackle, which is, I think, very clearly the most upgradable spot on the Bills offense. Like, you could talk me into that all day long. You can also talk me into Spencer Brown's development too, which I hate to not like say this is what I would do, but I really do see both sides of it. Spencer, I don't have to do the Spencer Brown like rant. Everybody knows the Spencer Brown rant, but I mean, I do have evidence of the Bills being a top 5 offense, however you want to measure offense, for 2 years with Spencer Brown as the primary starter at right tackle, and he's entering year 3 where there's growth expected. Right. So I see it all. Like, I see both sides of it. And I could be convinced that offensive tackle is the right way to go with that first round pick. But I just feel like that hole at linebacker is so big. And I think Jack Campbell just it fits so well. I mean, all the intangibles you could ever want. Two-time defensive MVP at Iowa, who's a great defense the last couple of years. All the coaches' appreciation awards, the Nagurski Award winner, consensus All-American this past year. Size, athleticism, downhill ability. He might be a better downhill player than Tremaine Edmonds. I don't think he's going to have the same range.
Yeah.
Like in terms of coverage, like that's tough to do. I think Edmonds is special, but I mean, if you want a better take on player, a better downhill run defender, I mean, Campbell might be better than Tremaine in that capacity. And so just because I think I even think the drop off from Campbell to Sanders is pretty notable, just with Sanders and the type of player that he is. I think to really maximize Sanders, you're going to want to rush him a lot, right? Get him in the A gaps, rush him off the edge, kind of like, don't take this too far, but that Micah Parsons role where they will play him some as a stack backer, sometime as a rush player. And maybe if you want to do that and tap more into moving Milano to middle linebacker on some of these lighter packages and bringing Taylor Rapp on the field, like maybe you can get creative, but until the Bills choose to get creative like that with defensive personnel, I'm not going to believe that it's going to happen. So I just think Cam, like, training with Luke Kuechly, right? I mean, come on, like everything, it's all there, man. Iowa, right? Midwest corn-fed dude, man. He's
Sean McDermott,
played all the sports in high school, right? I mean, come on, this is a Bills guy through and through. It's just a matter of do they agree, and is pick 27 appropriate? I think it is. Yeah,
I think with the player that he is, combined with the fit, combined with the need, that you're okay taking him there. Like, and again, I second that notion. I like your point on Sanders, and not just because it's one that I've also echoed. I don't see the Bills taking him unless, again, so are you going to play him as like an off-ball guy on first and second, and then are you going to lean into him, and put him on the edge on third down, and then are you bringing, Taylor Rapp in as the dime linebacker, which could potentially happen, and knowing what Sean McDermott did in Carolina with how aggressive he was with his fronts and the varied fronts that he used in Carolina, maybe that could happen. But I'm with you. Like, until I see it, I just think that's a bolder projection. And that's not to knock Drew Sanders, but that's a significant part of his value. Like, you see, when you're watching the tape, it doesn't matter who the opponent is, on obvious passing downs, or especially on third downs, he's kicking down to edge, and then he's spiking or he's rushing, and that's part of his skill set. That's part of his value. And if you're not tapping into that, does it really make sense to take that guy with your first pick, especially when the opposite in Jack Campbell, who I think you were spot on. Like, I don't think he has the range that Tremaine Edmonds does, and I don't think that's a knock on Jack Campbell. Tremaine Edmonds is a unicorn and a pterodactyl at the linebacker position, but I do think he's a better run defender in coming forward in terms of leveraging gaps and processing, in terms of, kind of functioning in the box, but also being able to function in space. So he's a downturn a little bit in coverage wise, but I think he's a bit of an uptick against the run, and what he can do mentally, who he is. It just seems like it fits. And I've seen a lot of people talk about Drew Sanders and what you can do. I don't see the Bills going in that direction until we see them go in that direction. Like, there's got to be some kind of proof of life before you can like that.
Maybe for the Drew Sanders conversation, the player to invoke is probably Lorenzo Alexander. Right. Fair. Like the way that McDermott used him. I only think he was there for 1 year. Did he play 17 and 18 or just 17? I can't remember.
I thought 17 was his last year.
But it was like a true Sam linebacker. That's not a thing in the NFL today.
No.
But if you wanted that to be a thing, Drew Sanders would be wonderful for that type of role.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another one too. I think, like, the fit. I think people see and they're like, oh, well, this guy's rated highly and he's a linebacker. Cool. And it's like, and that's my same conversation with, I like Trenton Simpson a lot as a linebacker, or not even as a linebacker. Like, I like him more as like a big nickel overhang athlete type of guy trying to figure out what he can do, more than I do like an off-ball linebacker that you want to plug into Mike. Like, I feel like he's not as good in the box as he is like living out in space and on the overhang. And that's where that fit comes in, and the conversation piece. And it really does feel like the stars align for the Bills going with Jack Campbell in the first round. So I second that notion. Very fair. Very fair. All right. Now we move on to round 2. So you've given the Bills Jack Campbell in round 1. Now we move on to round 2, pick 59 for the Buffalo Bills. Now this is obviously where we start to get more into the weeds in terms of maximizing value, positional need, fit, skill set. But also you've got 50, well, not 58 because the Dolphins lost their pick. You've got 57 guys that have been taken off the board. So now we're also trying to project more how we also think the board is going to fall. I'm sure a lot of people here are going to throw up like, oh man, the Bills should get Jack Campbell here. Not going to last. Man, it would be great if the Bills got like Josh Downs here. Doesn't look like he's going to last. So that factors in as well. Who'd you go with in round 2? And what was your thought process behind it?
I know everyone's going to hate me, but I have another defensive player.
Oh, so do I.
All right. So we're going down together, my guy. Appreciate that. I'm concerned about defensive tackle, Anthony.
I think we have the same guy, but okay.
We got four players here. Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Tim Settle, Jordan Phillips. They're all expiring contracts.
Yep.
I think Daquan Jones and Ed Oliver, that's a good 1-3 combo. I can roll with that. Is Tim Settle that good? Is Jordan Phillips has had hamstring problems for the last 3 years. Not to mention he's coming off of torn rotator cuff that required surgery. It's like
the
a
hamstring
5 to 6 month thing.
Big time. And the hamstring one, I feel people just think about, well, if he didn't belly flop, he wouldn't hurt the shoulder. He pulled up lame in that Tennessee Titans game trying to block on the interception late and hurt his hammy. So great point.
Right. So it's real disastrous things happened at the end of that Tennessee game.
Awful.
Like that was fun to watch them wave the white flag halfway through the third quarter. Yeah. Like that was cool. But like, can I have Micah Hyde back and Jordan Phillips not to hurt his hamstring?
Dane Jackson hurt his neck and got taken out on the ambulance.
Like that win got really not cool really quick.
Yeah. Real bad.
Jeez, dude. But anyways, I'm nervous about it, especially with, you're going to have a young linebacker, whether it's Bernard or whoever they draft. Mm-hmm. You want to give them a chance. You need to have really solidify your interior defensive line. I think Keanu Benton, in all all the ways that I just talked about, Jack Campbell, Midwest, Wisconsin, high school wrestler, size, athleticism, can play the 1, can play the 3, he's got all this stuff, man. He's got all this stuff. And so I think that gives the Bills a pillar for that defensive tackle room moving forward, where I think it gives you a really nice hedge against Phillips/Settle, but also gives you at least something going into 2024.
Again, this was my pick, so I'm right on board with you. And this one I think is a good marriage of the player and the skill set they have, but also the need. There is no defensive tackle, like you said, that is signed through 2024. Like at all the defensive tackles on the Bills roster right now, none of them are on the roster in 2024. There's some cap hits from void years for Daquan Jones and Tim Settle, but they're not physically on the roster. Tim Settle, I don't want to rake him over the coals again. Last year, from an advanced metric standpoint, had some of the worst advanced metrics. Like I'm talking out of like 206 qualifying defensive linemen in pass rush productivity coming in like the 190s consistently in true pass sets and regular, and it matches up with what you saw on tape. Granted, he was banged up a bit, but the production really dipped, especially once Von Miller went out. Jordan Phillips is probably your defensive tackle 3 right now, or 4, depending on who you think is better between him and Settle, and no disrespect. I don't think that's a great situation either way because of his injury history that followed him to Arizona. It's followed him here. Like he just consistently cannot stay healthy. And then if you're looking at their top 4 right now of Jones, Oliver, Phillips, and Settle, after that, it's Ilianku and Brandon Bryant and some guys who perform well in spurts, but can you really rely on them to give you top 4 rotational snaps in a group that rotates so heavily on the defensive line? And then again, you got nobody in 2024. Keanu Benton, you nailed it. I'm a huge fan, like 6'4", 309 to 15 pounds, depending on where you're getting your weights from. He adds size, he adds depth, but he also adds versatility. Like you can use him as a 3 tech, you can line him up as a 2 or a 1, you can line him up head up on the center, or use him as a nose, or use him as a shade. I love his active hands. Good swim move, arm over, just always active hands, quick. And then some advanced stats for some folks. Of the 204 interior defensive linemen that had 50% of pass rush snaps in 2022, Keanu Benton was 3rd in the nation in pass rush productivity. He was also tied for 4th in QB hits. He was 5th in pass rush productivity in true pass sets. So those are non-play action, no screens, longer than 2.5 seconds. He was also 7th in stop percentage versus the run out of 216 interior defensive linemen. And he had an average depth of tackle of 0.8 versus the run. He's big. He's quick. He's athletic. I think he's a good depth guy this year. You let him grow and kind of funnel into that role, and he helps you out in 2024 and beyond. The tape is good. The advanced metrics are good. The only other alternate timeline I might consider, if one of the offensive tackles fall, like initially, even back to a couple weeks ago, I thought maybe Matthew Bergeron would be available here. Now I'm starting to think that's not going to be the case. And I think Benton, the fit, the need, the caliber of player, I think it all aligns. And you and I think you and I chatted about this briefly on Twitter a week or so ago. The defensive line is a bigger need than people realize. I don't think it's being talked about enough, whether it's the interior or even the edge. Like if Von Miller misses time, right now you just got Groot, AJ Epinesa, and Boogie Basham as your top three guys. And then your fourth is Kingsley Jonathan, who is a question mark. Boogie is a question mark in to be nice, but probably not ideal. What you want is your third guy in the rotation. AJ Epinesa is a UFA next year. So even if he kills it, you're still looking to add for next year. Like that defensive line, I know fans don't want to hear it. And I know fans don't want to see defense back to back, but especially with the defensive line, I know they think, well, we drafted Rousseau and Epinesa and Basham, but we spent these high caliber picks on the edge, and we signed Von Miller, and we've signed all these guys. We shouldn't have to keep going back to the well. I don't think that's an argument for not going back to the well. And also, regardless of what capital or resources you've spent on the defensive line, at the end of the day, that defensive line right now for 2023 and beyond is significantly questionable.
Have a lot of, you interact with Bills fans all the time. I do as well. And you have a lot of people out there that really believe like go offense, and figure it out on defense.
Yep.
Like that's a real thought process that people have and champion and really believe in it. Yep. I don't subscribe to that at all. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs, since drafting Patrick Mahomes in the first round, I think, man, I wish I had this number right in front of me. I'm pretty sure like 16 of their 20 picks in the first 3 rounds have been defensive players.
I think you're looking at Thornhill and McDuffie and Chenal and Bolton and Karlaftis and defensive tackle mixed in there at some point. They've gone heavy.
I have the data. I have the data because but I just need to get it here.
Beautiful. I'll stall until you pull it up. That's a fair point. I think people are very reactionary to the Eagles defense was talked about so highly going into the Super Bowl, the pass rush, the coverage, the coaching, all of it. And I think people saw that defense not perform up to snuff in the Super Bowl. And so the reactionary take from it is, see, you don't need defense. Just go and turn into a glass cannon and go full offense and try and score 40 points a game and help Josh Allen. You don't need defense. But there's always going to be some semblance of balance. You need that. You can't just be a complete glass cannon. Like you need that support on the other side of the ball.
Got the number here.
Beautiful.
Since Patrick Mahomes was drafted in 2017, 15 of the Chiefs' 20 top 4-round picks have been defensive players. Oh, by the way, they traded away Tyreek Hill.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
What are we doing? Defense doesn't matter? Are you kidding? I can't get on board with that. I want a balanced, complete football team.
Yes, you need it. And there's just, and I think that's either side. Like, I don't think you can just go full tilt defense. I don't think you can go full tilt offense. Like, you need that semblance of balance. My favorite phrasing, I say it a bunch on the show, if you're playing rock, paper, scissors, you need to be able to throw rock, paper, and scissors because you don't know what kind of opponent you're going to come up against. And if you're always throwing rock, that works if your opponent is only throwing scissors. But what happens if they also throw rock? Or what happens if they throw paper? You're going to lose every time. Your odds of winning go up if you can throw all three. You need versatility on each side of the ball, but you also need versatility as a team to be able to combat whatever type of opponent you get. I really appreciate you being on that same wave because it's just a huge any joking mock. I could do a mock at like 1 a.m. because I'm up and I'll just throw it out for the hell of it. And someone will be like, defense in the first 3 rounds, this mock sucks. And
right. No regard to the players on there. Yeah. Like what exceptions do you take with this list of football players? Oh, nothing, that they just play defense. Wait, what? What are you talking about, dude?
Yeah. Well, they're
These
on the side
players.
of the ball, so I don't want them. Yeah. Very fair. What do you think? So I was kind of reading your face a little when I mentioned Bergeron. Where do you think Bergeron lands now? You think he's starting to
31 to
rise?
Kansas City.
Do you think he's risen up that much the first
Oh, I
round?
think he's good. Yeah. Does he get past Miami at 51? No chance, right?
Oh, good call. I mean, he's got tackle or guard, depending on where you want to line him
Both
up.
sides, dude.
Right. And I think what's so encouraging, like his tape is messy at times, but he's still able to win because of his strength and athleticism and like his grip strength. Like, so imagine what happens when you clean him up and polish him a little bit. Like, yeah, I wanted to put him here, but I was really just like, I don't think he lasts. Like, I'd love to get again a tackle in the first 2 rounds, but we talked about what happens for the first. And I just don't see Bergeron falling. And it's the same with the people who I've gotten who are like, oh, just take DeJuan Jones at 59. I don't think DeJuan Jones is going to last to 59 from Ohio State. Like, these tackles are going to go. Like, that's a premium position. And when you got guys who flash traits like that,
yeah,
oh, man.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into some of the offensive tackles that I think would make sense at some point, but it's just, it goes back to what I warned everyone about in the open. It's like, well, there's things that I'm nervous about and there's talent cliffs. And so linebacker and defensive tackle, I just don't think that they're positions that you can really wait on and feel like you're going to get answers.
That's a great way to say it. And I fell in a similar boat with defensive tackle, like someone who I do like Kobe Turner from Wake Forest, but my worry with that is then you're almost like hoping that he falls to 91 because that like, and I don't know if that's going to happen, or even if it does, like you're forced and you're pigeonholed. Again, I don't want to be in that spot. Like, also, again, I like Benton more in terms of what he offers. Very similar mindset. I think it's funny when we do these, like of all the players that we have at our disposal to pick, I think it's funny when I always do these organically. Like, I don't want to know who my guest has for like rankings and things. Bruce and I do this all the time, and we always end up landing on like the same players for stuff. So I thought that was pretty funny that we both landed on Benton. All right, round 3. So now we're going to pick 91 in the draft. And for you, you've gone Jack Campbell, you've gone Keanu Benton. So you've gone defense. The fans are up in arms. They got torches and pitchforks. Yeah. They don't understand because they think defense doesn't matter anymore in football. So where are you here in round 3 and why?
I got a bone for the people who want an offensive player. And this is why I'm willing to wait. Let me actually preface this by saying the NFL has been so kind to teams that wait for wide receivers on day 2. Like, think about the best receivers in the NFL right now. It's a bunch of day 2 picks. Debo Samuel, DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens was a recent example of that. I mean, they have been so kind to teams that wait for wide receivers. And there's a receiver that I love in this class. And maybe I'm getting a little bit aggressive here and hopeful that this player's there, but Marvin Mims out of Oklahoma.
Okay.
That's a dude that I really like. I think there's a lot of Jahan Dotson to his game, first rounder for the Commanders last year. And he's not as small as you think he's going to be. He actually measured in, hold on, I got it right here, 5'11", 183 with almost 32-inch arms, which is not expected. But like, this dude plays big, man. He's a dog. I think he can play inside or outside. I love him at the catch point. Tons of explosiveness. I mean, 4.38, 40-yard dash, 39.5-inch vert, 1.55, 10-yard split. He's an explosive dude that I think can win at all levels, gives you that yards after catch, can get vertical. I think he can be a player that, you know, if you can't bring back Gabe Davis, you could look at him as a potential 2. Right now, I think he can really challenge Shakir for the 3 if we were looking at Shakir as a 3. And so I think he's the type of receiver that Josh Allen has proven that he likes to win with, right? Separators, not necessarily size guys that can really get open, really reliable hands. I mean, that would be a dream 3rd round pick for me.
So I'm in a similar boat. The hardest one for me with this one at 91. So I also went with receiver, and my biggest hurdle here, my biggest hindrance was this wide receiver class annoys the ever-loving hell out of me because of a lot of the redundancy you have in terms of sizes and frames. I'm actually really interested to see what it becomes long-term because you've got so many guys that are either positionally and skill set wise or size and frame wise outliers for what the position should be. So there's a lot of guys here who, if they succeed, I'm like, do people still keep seeing them as outliers, or does this maybe like give hope to smaller guys? And does this buck the trend a little bit? Do we see a new like wave that's coming through? But this group is so slot heavy, or guys that have like Z wide receiver potential. There's not a lot of true X's. And so with that, I think you had some of this last year with the top tier of receivers, but I think a lot of with where the receivers go in this draft is going to come down to what a team needs. Like, do you need a slot receiver? Do you need more explosivity in yards after the catch? Do you need a bigger body guy and a ball winner based on, how your quarterback throws? Do you want more of a true X kind of guy based on what your group looks like? And I ran through a whole bunch, and I had Mims. Mims was one of the guys I considered here. I settled on kind of two, so I kind of cheated. I went with Tank Dell from Houston. And part of it is tied to something you mentioned. Josh Allen likes guys that separate. He likes seeing his guy come open before he throws that football. And Tank Dell is an enigma to me. I know the size. I know he's small. I know his weight. I know
5'8", 165, Anthony.
1,000%.
5'8", 165, my guy.
I know. Huge outlier. Like, everything about him should not make sense. And I'm not saying this makes him succeed. I watched the tape. I see a guy who runs like quality routes, who can separate at multiple points in the stem. He can separate at the break. He's got some snap. He's got intelligence with his routes. I was watching the game against Navy, and now it's not the best because you're playing against Navy, but he runs a fade in the red zone, and it's an incomplete pass. And the next play, he stems it the exact same way. I'm talking like counting the steps, the angle that he takes. It's the exact same piece. The head turn, he plants, pops, turns, cuts it back inside, creates about 3-4 yards of separation. As the ball gets thrown, he turns upfield, catches it, gets into the end zone, touchdown. And I just see this guy who led the nation in touchdowns in 2022, and not because he's huge, big play, explosive guy, but because he wins in the red zone consistently because of how he can separate. He functions there because of his ability to separate. He led the nation in catches for first down. I know, and everything even in my mind and in my soul is yelling at me, being like, he's 165 and he's 5'8". Like, I don't think that plays, but also I'm going to take a shot on a guy who I think can separate, who I think has some nuance and some explosiveness to his game. Obviously, there's going to be the questions around the frame. He's an outlier. He's an enigma. Everything about him does not make sense. And I also thought it was interesting, too. I think what kind of pushed me into this direction a little bit, too, the Bills having a top 30 visit with him, I thought was very interesting. Not that necessarily like means, oh, well, they love this guy and they're going to take him. But I thought that was interesting as well. I went with Tank Dell, and maybe he's not even there. Maybe somebody bites, but I feel like because of the size and the frame, he could fall. Give me your thoughts.
Well, the little receivers are tough to project, right? You never know when a team's going to trade up for Wan'Dale Robinson at whatever was it, 40-something? The Giants did that. You never know when Calvin Austin is a third-round pick, right? Or Darnell Mooney falls to the fifth round. So figuring out the riddle of small receivers and valuations really, really challenging. But I mean, I hear you, dude. Like, it looks like corners, when they try to cover Tank Dell, it looks like they're trying to chase a rabbit, dude. I mean, that's exciting, right? Mm-hmm. And he certainly has a competitive toughness. It's just like, show me the list of receivers in the NFL at 5'8", 165 that are doing anything. And it's hard to produce that. So
absolutely.
I've said this before, but I look at scouting as risk assessment. Take all the information that I can, compare it to historical norms, and tell me what the most likely path is for that player. And I don't feel like I get a very good risk assessment of a player like Tank Dell. He could be awesome, but I mean, I just have too many questions about the size. And like, as a third-round pick and a projected, hopefully top 3 receiver for your team, like, is he going to be able to handle that volume? Is he going to be a 70 to 100 target a year guy? I don't know. You know what I mean? And that's what kind of makes me nervous.
No. And and I'm not just saying it just to say it. Like, I literally, as I was writing everything, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And then I'm like, but I really like the tape. And I'm like, yeah, but like, again, point to who's the best guy in that range that had like the most successful Tavon Austin?
I mean, I've been sitting here looking like John Brown's 5'10", 179. That's really different than 5'8", 165.
Yes,
that's
legitimately.
It's like 15 pounds
Yeah,
and
big
2
time.
inches.
But
And
then I
John
think,
Brown's small.
yes, he's a tiny guy buying at like 1,000%, and he's bigger. But then I think like, okay, so that I keep doing the whole yin and yang and pendulum swing, and then I'll be like, okay, that doesn't make sense. Then I'm like, but he just keeps separating and keeps separating. Another one that I have in my mind at this spot, he's somebody I like going into the Senior Bowl, and I had some concerns from a route running standpoint, but he gave me a bit more hope at the Senior Bowl. And then so it's the opposite of Tank Dell. Size, frame. I think he's more of a long-term, more of a project from a precision standpoint. I like Jonathan Mingo. I'm not saying him take you here at 3. I don't know where he's a guy who I initially thought could be a 4th round guy. But now there's like more buzz again. I think some of the buzz around him is, I mean, he's 6'2", 220 plus. He runs a 4.46. He's built like AJ Brown, comes from the same school, and he's in a class filled with Tank Dells and Zay Flowerses and Josh Downs and Jordan Addison's, guys who are smaller and don't have the frame, and big body dude, ball winner. I also think what's interesting too is, what do the Bills think of Shakir? Is Shakir the long-term slot, or do they believe he can live on the boundary? He was almost 50-50 as a rookie in terms of where he saw his snaps. So do they want to add a slot receiver? Or if they think Shakir is the long-term slot, do you try to add another boundary guy? What does Gabe Davis's future looks like if he balls out this year or has a good year in general? I know the receiver market came back down to earth a little bit this year in free agency, but is he too rich for the Bills' blood? And do you need somebody who can live on the outside with a bit more size? I also think Mingo's interesting because he represents a skill set I don't think the Bills have. The Bills don't have like a physical, big ball winner type of receiver that also has speed, like that big dude who you can throw on like a little smoke screen and he can get upfield and break a tackle from a linebacker and a safety and then take it to the house with the speed that he has. And what encouraged me comes from Ole Miss, heavy RPO offense, doesn't really run the real route tree, and you don't see that on tape. But at the Senior Bowl, he showed more precision and nuance than I thought he was going to going into the Senior Bowl. And so my hope is you get him with NFL coaching and in an NFL room, and that ceiling, the odds of him potentially hitting that ceiling go up. So I also kicked my personal favorite here would be Mingo, but I think I feel like he might go earlier now since everybody's jumping on the train.
Well, I mean, numbers are going to help here. There can't be 20 receivers drafted in the top 100, right? That's just
true.
not going to happen.
I just don't know who's going to what skill sets are, what fits are what, and then who bites.
Mingo's in that, like, if the Bills were to go with a middle round receiver, kind of like, I think this is what we're talking about, 3rd, 4th round.
Yep.
Mingo's on my list of guys that I would like for sure. Yeah.
Very fair. Again, he was ideally like pre-buzz the last month. My hope was like, oh, just like take Mingo. And like, at first I was like, maybe he could be a 5th round guy. And I was like, oh, probably 4th. Now I'm like, does he last to 91? Like, and again, it comes down to this class and fit and all this stuff that throws in a ton of variables. Now, all right, we're going to look at the later rounds. So rounds 4 through 6. I didn't put 7 because the Bills don't have a 7th round pick. Their last pick comes in at the 205th pick in the draft, which is a 6th round pick. So we're not going to deep dive into each of these rounds, but Joe, let's talk high level based on what you've addressed. So you're building this ideally. You've got linebacker, you've got defensive tackle, you've taken a wide receiver now in round 3. What are you trying to build out in the rest of the draft here in rounds 4 through 6? Are you going just best player available, or are you sticking to premium positions? What's your thought process and what are you looking at?
Roster ability. That's what I'm looking for. Roster ability. Guys that I can draft and guys that I can roster. And I think there's 3 positions that I would prioritize with these picks. And obviously this is going to be dictated by who's available and that type of thing. But with these picks, and assuming the Bills were to follow everything I said to this point, I look at edge rusher, I look at tight end, and I look at offensive tackle. Okay. Edge rusher, I think, you already mentioned it. We got to be ready for a world where Von Miller is not ready to go to start the season, right? Like, I know that everybody's very excited about Von Miller and he's playing golf and seems like he's on the up and up, but he tore his ACL on Thanksgiving. We just saw Trey White tear his ACL on Thanksgiving and didn't come back to what, like week 11 till Thanksgiving the next year?
Literally almost a full year.
Right. And I know Von has an advantage because he's been through some major injury rehab, but he's also 34 now, right? Like, dude, your body's just different. So,
and he's already torn that ACL before. So you're older. It's the same ACL tear. Like you're not necessarily bouncing back for both of those reasons.
right. So you're looking at a situation right now where your starting defensive ends are Greg Rousseau and AJ Epinesa, with defensive end 3 being Boogie Basham and Kingsley Jonathan playing 30% of your snaps on defense. That has me nervous, my guy. And remember what the Bills did when Von Miller went down? Who did they start opposite of Greg Rousseau? Shaq Lawson. They told you that we think that Shaq Lawson's our 3rd best defensive end last year. They told us.
Yeah. Which
right
isn't
now,
what you want to see.
No, dude. Like this is concerning. This is concerning.
Yeah.
Now, where I think you get excited is this is a really ridiculously good edge rusher group, right? I think you can, in the 4th round, I think you can find a really appealing player that can get some run this year and be part of your mix moving forward. I think that can happen. I think about tight end, where, I mean, Quentin Morris is your tight end too. You want to talk about upgradability? That seems pretty obvious to me. And I don't not like Quentin Morris. I respect the opportunity that he's had, the opportunity that he's earned, right, to make that roster. Play a fair amount of snaps, primary blocking, but made a few catches as well. Like, I think he's a reasonable player, but I think he's upgradable. And the Bills, there's going to be another tight end that makes the team that's not on the roster right now. Tommy Sweeney's not walking through those doors. Maybe he will. Maybe Tommy Sweeney won't make the Giants. The Bills will sign him. He'll be on the roster. But there's room for a tight end, a rostered tight end. So I'm looking at that. And I certainly think you can get some blocking upside there too. I think that would be a major asset to the Bills, especially, I think they'll probably use Tommy Doyle in that Bobby Hart role. I think, and the original Tommy Doyle role, right? He did it before Bobby Hart. So I think there'll be some value there, but you're going to want some blocking there. And then, of course, offensive tackle, where, Spencer Brown needs meaningful competition. David Questenberry's back, but that certainly doesn't move me off of trying to find, I think you have room. Like, if you look at the starting 5 as is, and then you have this David Questenberry, David Edwards, Ike Bucker backup situation, you're still going to roster 9 offensive linemen. Tommy Doyle's probably 9. The Bills have rostered 10 at times.
Fair.
So I think getting another, one of these offensive tackles that you can develop potentially as your swing and potentially as a guy that can push Spencer Brown, right? I think another investment there makes sense. So with rounds 4 through 6, it's edge, tight end, offensive tackle for me, where I'd like to see some of those investments.
Quick question for you in regards to tight end. How do you feel? I mean, I think a lot of this would be tied to, do the Bills want to go more 12 personnel, which is a whole nother conversation. If someone like if Sam Laporta is there at 59, does that do anything for you?
It excites me. I think Sam Laporta's a great prospect. Here's the deal. Yeah. This is where I struggle with that. I'm old enough to remember 2 years ago, the Buffalo Bills, by choice, playing one tight end, having one tight end active on game days for like the last 4 games of the regular season and into the playoffs in 2021. It's unprecedented. I know. It's insane. By choice, they dressed Dawson Knox, and that's it. Okay, so that's something. And then I spent last year in the offseason talking about, it's Ken Dorsey. It's Mike Shula. When they were together in Carolina, they had Jeremy Shockey and Greg Olsen. Surely they're going to really go with this 12 personnel thing. And then it didn't happen. All right, so it's a little bit like this defensive thing that we talked about earlier, where are they really going to get creative with personnel and be more diverse with how they deploy some different skill sets? So until they actually run more 12 personnel and it becomes something, I'm not really going to believe that's going to happen. And I would struggle at pick 59 and especially at pick 27 measuring the impact, right? Like, let's be real about a tight end too. They're going to play snaps blocking and they're going to catch 20 passes. Like, will you ever be able to say, you know what, this was a great pick? We really got a lot out of this guy. He came out and caught 17 passes for 3 years, 3 years, like it's 3 years in a row, and he blocked on 30% of the snaps. And meanwhile, Dawson Knox collected his $14 million and had 650 receiving yards. Like, what? I just don't know that you're ever going to really maximize that. But if they really wanted to do it, they really want to get 12 heavy and tight end 2 is going to be a somewhat of a volume target. Okay. But I have hard time like coming to grips with it.
That's fair. The analyst side of me recognizes all of that and is on board with all of it. The fan in me wants, I just think 12 personnel is really somewhat of an ultimate like trump card in terms of how you can dictate to a defense. And I just have this envisionment of Diggs, Laporta, Knox, Davis, James Cook, and you're running, I don't know, regular 2x2, or you're running, Knox in line and Laporta's hipped off, and then you run something, and then you come up to the line and you're going no huddle, and all of a sudden you're in a 2x2 gun look, or all of a sudden you're in a spread look, and the defense is like, okay, do we match with nickel? Do we match with base? Do we have a linebacker that can cover Dawson Knox or Sam Laporta? And then, like, is Sam Laporta or Dawson Knox really your wide receiver 3 technically and wide receiver 4? And then maybe they're seeing more targets, and you start to go down the rabbit hole. But from a logistical standpoint, yeah, I don't think, again, until they show it to us, I don't think it's going to happen. But I think that this tight end class is strong. And then you also add in the fact of it's super good. But then you also add in the fact of, like, I mean, unless you're Kyle Pitts, and even that was mitigated to a degree, granted, you could put it on the team, like, rookie tight ends, what are they really doing? Like, so I think that goes into that value.
They're doing nothing.
Exactly. I think you're kind of spot on for, like, man, I love that we went tight end early, and the 17 passes that he caught were super encouraging.
That's all it's going to be.
Yeah.
Maybe. He might not get, that was probably an aggressive take. If the Bills drafted a tight end next year, they're probably going to catch about 10 passes. I can't wait for the offseason podcast where I have to talk about Sam Laporta and how he can take a step forward and catch 15 passes next year, because the Bills aren't going to change their market share. It won't happen.
Right, because he went up from 10. I like it. From a high level standpoint, I'm in a very similar boat when it comes to rounds 4 and 6. So with what we've done so far, we haven't addressed offensive tackle, and whether you're trying to bring somebody in to compete with Spencer Brown, or again, if it's just for depth, because right now you're looking at Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, David Quessenberry, Tommy Doyle. Do you really have faith in Quessenberry? I know a lot of fans still see Bryce Huff beating him off the snap and hurting Josh Allen's elbow. Like, is that the guy you really want at one of your bookend spots? I would love for them in round 4 to either address tackle or, in a Super Bowl, like you said, edge. I also wouldn't be opposed to edge earlier if the right player fell. I am very okay going edge early, which I know nobody wants to hear, because they're gonna be like, another edge early.
Yep.
Like, so I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I would be very okay with edge. And then same spot too. Yeah. Tight end and or wide receiver, if they don't address wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. I think you need to add a wide receiver at some point. I think there's very interesting skill sets and fits that are present, honestly, through the early parts of day 3. So if you don't address receiver in rounds 1, 2, or 3, I think there's still guys you could potentially hang your hat on in terms of introducing them to a group that you've increased the floor with Hardy and Sherfield. But what does their long-term viability look like? Hardy's been a guy that's been injured. Sherfield's on a 1-year deal. So I think taking a swing at wide receiver, tight end, tackle, edge, I'm giving priority to the trenches, though, like you are. Like, give me an offensive tackle, give me an edge. If they didn't address defensive tackle in the first 3 rounds, give me a defensive tackle somewhere there. But again, the talent drop-off is there. I think you got to reinforce the trenches as much as you potentially can. Joe, I'm going to grab this super chat. We're going to ask you this last question, and we'll get you out. Appreciate you being here, Draft Fanatics, and for the super chat. The question is, do you think any defensive back that we draft can make the roster? For example, Neal and Lewis. Bean has drafted a defensive back every season. Let's stick with this last part here. Bean has drafted a defensive back every season. Is this the first time he skips DB? What do you think?
I think there's room to roster a safety. Poyer, Hyde, Taylor Rapp, and then what? Is DeMar gonna play?
Yep.
I mean, I don't know. That's hard. I mean, like, Zane Anderson, you can miss me with that. So you have a 4th safety spot that I think is available to you. I would not be surprised if the corners that make the 53 are already on the roster. So I think it'd be more likely that they draft a safety, because I think there is room for one. And you may want to take advantage of this, right? Like, you have an opportunity right now for Poyer and Hyde to play in front of these guys, whatever young player. And so I think it would be potentially very smart to add one. So I don't know that I answered the question, but if he were to draft the DB, I would think it's a safety.
Yeah, I think I think it's close to like 50-50 in terms of, is this the first time he skips DB? I'm in the same boat though. If they do go DB, I do think it's a safety, and I would think it's somewhere in like round 5 or 6. I know they met with Amari Connor from Virginia Tech, who had some nice reps at the Senior Bowl. Maybe that's a guy who's on their list, but yeah, I don't think they're going corner. And then so much of it hinges on what's the long-term viability of Damar Hamlin, not just for 2023, but beyond. And then also, like, this safety class is so wonky, especially in comparison to how good the corner class is. The safety class is kind of meh. That's a larger conversation, but very good question. And thank you for the super chat. Joe went slightly over time, which I apologize for, but you were awesome. And as advertised, and for folks who are still here, we're going to continue on for another little bit as we do here on the show. But we're going to send Joe on his way. Again, thank you very much for being here. As advertised, I was hoping this was, going to be a good episode. I figured it would be. I hope it was enjoyable for you as well. And just in case some people don't know who you are or what you do or your work and anything and everything, plug away anything and everything that you got.
Yeah, appreciate it, dude. I enjoyed chatting with you. We'll have to do this again for sure. Host a daily podcast in the Buffalo Bills, Locked On Bills, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, where we talk about the entire team and really focus in on team building. Have 2 books, Go Bills. They're right behind me. The other one's Buffalo's Run. So if you're looking for some summer reading on the Buffalo Bills, I have that for you as well. So, Anthony, really appreciate you having me on. The chat's been awesome. It's been a fun conversation. You don't really have to twist my arm to get me to talk Bills and draft. That's what I love to do. So this was a great way to spend a Tuesday night.
Beautiful. I appreciate you. Go about your merry way and get some sleep. And I appreciate you. And I'll see you on Twitter.
All right, dude. We'll catch you next time.
Later. I appreciate you folks being so kind to Joe in the chat, as I figured you would be. You guys are a really gracious group. But also, I mean, Joe is absolutely tremendous. So really, really good guest that I was pumped to have on. I've tried to get him on at different points before, and I was never really we were never able to make it work, especially with when the show used to be on Wednesdays at 7, but now that's on Tuesdays, we have a little bit more flexibility. So I was able to get him on the show, and I was pretty pumped for that. Now, I've started a bunch of comments that have gone through this episode from you folks, but just in case, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, as we start to, finish this last segment here. Anything, question on prospects or players or positions, or a question that you had for myself or Joe that we didn't necessarily answer, whatever's on your mind, start throwing it up into the chat. We'll start to have a discussion on some of those things as we do here, as we wind down here on the show. And while you folks are thinking of those questions and or putting something in the chat, I want to bring up the sponsor, which you folks know, One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. You can see the sponsor in the bottom right-hand corner, left-hand. I'm so terrible at this. At one of the bottom corners, you see that logo that looks awesome and says One Pie Pizza. That is their logo. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms. Delicious sweet sauce pie, cup of char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese. They do a lot of drives and initiatives for the community. They really give back, and they give you delicious pizza for your taste buds. So go get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Tell them Disguise Coverage sent you, and you might get a treat. So go get yourself some One Pie. Also, as we transition here, if you haven't already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video if you would be so kind. I know it's corny to ask, and I say it every week that I know that it's corny to say that, but likes are the lifeblood of live streams here on YouTube. So if you're here, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. We still got a ton of people that are rolling here live. If you enjoyed the content with Joe, if you enjoy myself, if you enjoy the show, whatever have you, please drop a like on this video. If you're sad about the Sabres, drop a like on this video. Just takes a couple seconds. If you would be so kind as to drop a like, that would be awesome. Thank you. Appreciate you folks. Let's go back and I'll just grab this comment here from Ralph, who says it's a strong corner year. Yeah, the draft is very strong when it comes to corner. But then, moving Christian Benford to safety in order to get a corner. That's a potential move that could happen. I think it's more likely than the Bills drafting a corner given what they have. The Christian Benford move is very interesting. I like him at corner. I actually liked him more at corner in his rookie year than I did Kyer Elam. So I would like Benford to stay at corner and continue to provide competition for Elam and see who wins out at corner too. But I recognize the value of having a long-term option there at safety, especially if you can take Benford this year, transition him to safety, allow him to learn under Poyer and Hyde, and just kind of, get time on task, like Joe says, and get some, reps on the job, some firsthand experience. So that way, when he needs to hit the ground running, potentially next year or the year after, you're set up for success a little more. Again, if we're looking at safety next year, Micah Hyde is in the same boat that Jordan Poyer was this year. He's a UFA. Does he come back? Are we doing this dance where he tests free agency and then does he go somewhere else? Does he come back? Like, do you really want to risk that again? So I think he's a very interesting domino piece for this defense in terms of determining what they do in the draft and the offseason going forward. Again, I like him at corner. I don't hate the move of him going to safety, but I really liked what he did at corner. Physical, big, good tackler. And the value is tremendous. And I don't even think it's just about the value. Like when you watch him on tape, like he played well. So I'm interested to see what he does because it potentially leads to obviously some other moves that you could see. Good thought there. Good thought there. Oh, really good comment here from Claude. Claude says the Bills content group is rare. They have a group of guys who are good at info, understanding, and analyzing the teams. Whoa, huge motorcycle outside. Sorry for the noise. And then Claude says also they're generally good guys. I hope I'm potentially included in that mix, but just in case you meant Joe, yeah, Joe is tremendous. And the content group is rare. I think you got a good collection here when it comes to the Bills content group. Very nice, very nice, very nice. Ooh, Steve coming in. Haven't talked about DeAndre Hopkins here. Steve says, what about 27 for Arizona's 32 and Hopkins? And then you use 32 to draft a linebacker. I don't hate it. I don't know how they're willing to do that. So let me really look at this. So you're trading 27 for 32 and Hop. I think it depends on what salary the Bills are eating versus what Arizona is eating. I'm not opposed. Again, I'm the further down in the draft you get towards drafting Jack Campbell, the happier I am. But I would be okay with him going at 27. But very interesting. The Hop news is kind of simmered a little bit. We heard more rumblings that the Cardinals may release him. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's really interesting in seeing who has the leverage. Is it Hopkins? Is it the Cardinals? Are all these other teams kind of sitting and waiting? The shoe still hasn't dropped on Odell Beckham. Like even the Aaron Rodgers news, like there's all this leverage is so important in today's NFL and sports in general that, I wonder where Hop ends up, especially if he hits the open market, if Arizona releases him, which I don't see happening. But it'll be interesting to see. And I think it's a fair point. I think we've kind of forgotten about the Hopkins hype for a bit. Ooh, Daryl comes through and says, I'm still going back and looking at late round boundary receivers with size and speed. I'm at Ford Wheaton from West Virginia and Matt Landers. I think both did well at the combine, if I'm not mistaken. Wouldn't mind either late. I'm in the same in a similar spot when it comes to receiver, right? Give me if you're not going early and going for the traditional skill set fit like Josh Downs or Zay Flowers or something, give me someone who represents a skill set that the Bills don't have. It's part of the reason that I really like Jonathan Mingo. 6'2", 220 plus, runs a 4.46. He's got size. He's thick. He's got speed. He can break a tackle. He can take one to the house. He can also line up as like an H-back and offer you some blocking ability against like edges and linebackers and safeties. He can win the ball going downfield as a boundary guy. He also can work in the slot a little bit. You do have to refine his route running, but that's part of the reason, like I mentioned earlier, why I like Mingo. But I'm in a similar spot, right? Like, I think you need to add a receiver at some point in this draft. And ideally, it's either a known quantity or a skill set that you do not have. Part of the reason I like Tank Dell, although, again, I wrestle with it all the time. I know how much of an outlier that he is. He separates. And I think that separation is what is needed in this Bills offense. And it's what Josh Allen needs. But I also like the idea of having a physical ball winner who's big and strong and fast, who the Bills don't have. Like Gabe Davis has size and speed, quote unquote, but not like what Mingo does, where Mingo can be two steps in like a cloud of dust or bust you off like a 20-yard, 30-yard gain real quick just by getting the ball in his hands, in addition to being able to break tackles and being physical. So, and then other follow comment here from you, Daryl, saying, I feel like Mingo has moved up to the round 3 conversation. I think he has. I really think that my initial hope in this offseason was the Bills could get Mingo at like 130 with that 4th round pick. But now as we've gone forward, I've started to get scared of that. And I really believe, like, if you want to get Mingo, if you're the Bills, I think you've got to take him at 91. If he's even there. Again, whether it's because he's actually good and people like the projection, or just because his skill set and frame don't exist in this draft, this is a small wide receiver draft, especially towards the top, right? All the guys are like 170 to 185 or 90 pounds. It's a small class. Like, you don't have a lot of 6', 200 guys. And Mingo is 6'2", 226 and runs a 4.46 and then has the tape of him, mossing guys and winning downfield. Again, he does have to clean up some aspects, but I think even just from a unique standpoint, he represents a potential that doesn't really exist in this wide receiver class. And I think that immediately vaults him up into that wide receiver 3 conversation. Well, and Bill's saying, I want an offensive weapon that stresses the opponent's defense. I think that's very fair. Nikki saying, Anthony, what edges do you like in the late first, early second, and late third, early fourth? Late first, early second, I like Felix Anudike-Uzomah out of Kansas State. Pretty polished pass rusher already for me with some of the moves that he has, and he competes. He's violent at the contact point in the run and the pass. I do think he has to clean up some of his run defense in terms of leveraging and just kind of playing things appropriately with responsibility, but I like what he does. I really liked initially too, I know someone asked it earlier. I don't think Nolan Smith falls to 27, but I really, really, really like Nolan Smith. I know he's far from a finished product as a pass rusher, but with his athleticism and burst and bend and explosiveness off the edge, I think he gives you enough juice that you can do some things in the pass rush with him as a rookie. But his success as a run defender, and you put him and Groot as your bookends on the defensive line, and you're just able to hem everything in given his ability to succeed against the run. But I don't think Nolan Smith potentially lasts now. So really late first, early second edges I like. Again, trying to marry guys I like with who I think will be there. Felix Anudike-Uzomah, BJ Ojulari, a little bit further down. It's probably late second. I like Derek Hall from Auburn a little bit. Late third, early fourth, an interesting name. Colby Wooden from Auburn. He's kind of like a tweener, but you can use him on run stunts and slants. His stack and shed isn't necessarily there. And I don't love the overall athleticism, but he competes like crazy. And if you're just looking for somebody that gives you some semblance of physicality and competitiveness off the edge, if you can get him to anchor a little bit better and not play so high. But a lot of times he was playing on the interior as like a 3-tech, even though I don't think he's built for that world. He's 6'4", 273 pounds. Maybe kick him to the edge a little bit more potentially. So he's a guy that I potentially like a little bit later. This is an awesome comment from Haram. Cody should have beat Roman. Very interesting. And now Vince is back in power in WWE. So very interesting. Bill says, is A.T. Perry just tall and speed, or does he have hands too? He does have hands. He's a ball winner. I also think he's a better route runner in terms of suddenness and decisiveness than he necessarily gets credit for. He's tall, he's lanky, he's fast for his size and that. But I think he's a better route runner than he gets credit for. I like A.T. Perry. I don't think he's going to be there at 91. I think he's going to go somewhere in that like 50 to 70 range. Again, because of his skill set, but also his size and frame. He has X receiver potential, and there's not a lot of guys in this draft. From Claude, here's a couple other good names for edges. Isaiah Foskey, I don't know where he goes now, so I just left him out of the conversation. He initially was like a first round talent, early second. Now he's kind of fallen down boards as like mid second to third. If Foskey is like a late day 2 guy, I'm very cool with that. Byron Young, I'm assuming you mean the edge from Tennessee. Physical and explosive, not polished. But again, I'm down for adding athleticism and physicality. He also can drop into coverage, which is very interesting. So can Derek Hall from Auburn, like some of those guys who you can rush off the edge or drop into the curl flats or even the hook curls at times if you want to run some simulated pressures or zone blitzes. So that's easy. That's interesting. Nick Herbig from Wisconsin. Man, I've watched like one game of his, and I want to buy in because Wisconsin edges just always seem cool and successful. He is very undersized, and he doesn't allow you a lot of positional versatility or flexibility. But I mean, he's got juice coming off the edge. He's decently refined. He comes from a successful defense. What's going to hurt him is that he is undersized and he doesn't have a lot of positional versatility, but he seems to always be able to get to the quarterback. I'm always down for adding guys with traits, so physicality, explosiveness, violence, speed, juice, burst, or technique, like something that you can really hang your hat on. And he seems to be a dude who continues to win. Amicus and Bills Are Electric both say Mozzie Smith. I love Mozzie Smith out of Michigan. My worry with Mozzie is I think if you want to get him, if you're the Bills, I think you have to take him at 27. I think he goes probably in the 30s. Maybe he lasts to like 39. I don't think he lasts to 59 for the Bills' second pick. But he's a dude who he's not going to give you a ton of pass rush pop. Like that's not his game. But he has such a high motor and he gets low and plays low and drives that he can collapse the interior of the pocket. So I do like him. He's got a long arm that he'll use in pass rush, but power, extension, I would like to see him be a little bit better versus double teams, but he's got quickness for his size, short area agility, and he's somebody who gums up the works against the run with how powerful and violent he is off the snap and with his hands and his shedding. I really like Mozzie Smith, especially for a defense like the Bills that plays light boxes and plays a lot of nickel. Give me a physical run stuffer on the interior. I would love that. My problem is I really think you have to get him at 27. And if you're not getting him at 27, I don't think he's lasting to 59. Question here from Shrabney. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. She says, what do you think of McD calling plays on defense, aggressive or conservative? Maybe Jack Campbell is picked for that very reason, round one. So myself and Joe both went with Jack Campbell as like the realistic, the realistic and ideal option in round one, with leaning towards like the realistic. I think Sean McDermott goes more aggressive in his play calling. I think you see more of the Carolina Sean McDermott defense than what you've seen these last several years with Leslie Frazier. I think, you see more guys around the line of scrimmage. I think you see more pressuring of the quarterback, more pressuring of the run game, more disguised fronts, not necessarily disguised coverage, like the name of the show, but more, okay, who's going into this gap, who's blitzing, who's rushing, who's dropping, are they running stunts, are they running games, who's looping, who's spiking. I think you see a lot more confusion and havoc up front. And then in addition to that, more blitzes in general, also more zone blitzes, simulated pressures. I think you see more games up front. And so I would put that into the aggressive bucket. I do think you see a more aggressive Bills defense under Sean McDermott. And I think Jack Campbell makes sense because of how smart he is. He fits the scheme already with his size, his range, his ability to play the run. I think he can cover a little bit better than he gets credit for. He's smart. He's a leader. He's a captain. And also he gives you a high floor at the position. He plays somewhat, I don't want to say conservatively, but in a defense that is one gapping and penetrating and playing with a linebacker like Matt Milano who wants to shoot gaps and cause chaos. Having a Jack Campbell there to kind of clean everything up and make plays, I think that could potentially happen. Amicus says, I don't think the value is there at 27, but maybe if we move back, we pick up Campbell and Mozzie. Man, I would love a world where the Bills somehow, the issue with that is, right, if you move back from 27, then you have to pick up like 2 picks in the 30s. And then in order to get like Campbell and Mozzie, I'm confident goes between 30 and 40. Campbell, I really don't know. Some of it's going to be scheme fit. Like maybe somebody likes Drew Sanders because of what he can do off the ball, but because you can use him as an edge rusher or pass rusher on obvious passing downs or third down situations. Maybe you want to disguise more things on defense from a coverage in front standpoint, and you want Trenton Simpson as your linebacker one, or maybe you're a traditional guy and Jack Campbell's your number one. Like, I think it starts to get a little risky in terms of figuring out where Campbell goes after 27, because I think it's going to be a team-by-team basis with how this linebacker class is built. But in order to get Campbell and Mozzie, I think you'd need like 2 picks between 30 and 40, which is hard enough. And then you have to marry it up with guys not getting taken. Oh, here's one from Pat. Zach Harrison from Ohio State. Big, long. He's very much in the mold of what the Bills have done previously at edge rusher with guys who compress the pocket. I don't want to say that he's Gregory Rousseau because I think Rousseau is a bit of a unicorn in his own right, but long, lean, leverage, pocket compressor. That's what Zach Harrison is. He's going to come off the edge and he's going to try and drive that tackle into the backfield. He's going to compress the edge of the pocket. He's had some good reps. When I haven't watched a ton of Ohio State defense, but I've seen him because I'm watching teams that Ohio State defense is playing against, and he pops from that standpoint consistently. I also think this is the fair comment here. I worry about the Steelers with Campbell. Yeah, I think the Steelers pick, I think at like 32 and 49 after picking at pick 17. Someone can correct me on that if they want to look up the draft order. I really think the Bills, if the Steelers don't go linebacker at 17, which I don't think they will, I really think they go linebacker at 32. I really think they take a linebacker right there. And I feel like Campbell could be the guy. Drew Sanders is intriguing though, but I really believe that they go linebacker at 32, which would throw a wrench into the Bills mix. Justin says Zach Cunningham for $1.77 million. He can't cover. So that's rough. But a physical dude coming forward and playing the run, sure. You're losing a lot from a coverage standpoint. Again, you're going to lose a lot because Tremaine Edmonds is leaving, but I think like you can mitigate that loss a bit by bringing in a Jack Campbell or, certain players. Like I wanted Levante David for that very reason. I think Cunningham doesn't offer you enough from a coverage standpoint, even if it is for $1.77 million. But yeah, that's not necessarily my bag of tea, but I recognize the name. And again, he has a name out there. A free agent name that I do like, if we're talking edge rusher, I would like Leonard Floyd, especially if you can get him on a 1-year deal. Why not? Throw him out there and see what he could potentially be on the edge. I would love for the Bills to get a proven edge rusher in this offseason. I like some of the dudes in the draft. I like BJ Ojolari. I really like Felix Anaduke-Uzama, but I would still rather have some part of me wants the known quantity that like a Leonard Floyd represents, right? It's part of the reason I wanted Ogbani Okoronkwo from Houston, who signed with the Browns. Great signing for them. Like I want that proven NFL pass rush edge production. Motorcycle again. Wow, crazy loud. I don't know if you guys can hear that, or girls can hear that, but I can. I wanted some semblance of proven productivity off the edge and juice off the edge. If they get in the draft, cool. I would like them to grab an edge in free agency. And Leonard Floyd I was watching Taylor Rapp tape once the Bills signed Rapp. And Floyd, even last year, I know the Rams defense fell a bit and they weren't a good team, but he just pops. And you put Leonard Floyd on the opposite side of Greg Rousseau, or even you're working him in as that third guy. If it's Von Miller and Greg Rousseau and Leonard Floyd is your third guy in a 1-year deal on a prove it deal, cool. I would like that. What else? Oh, nice comment here from RJ saying, awesome show tonight. Joe's one of the best in the business. Very lucky to have him covering the Bills. Yes, he was absolutely fantastic. Let's grab some. Anthony says would love Leonard Floyd. I think that's fair. Oh, this is a good comment. Or question from Bill. Bill says, what player who is possible at 27 would make you the happiest? Probably Darnell Wright, the offensive tackle from Tennessee. I don't want to go linebacker in round 1. I don't hate it, but my issue with going linebacker in round 1 is that if you don't, it's going to be like we talked about earlier with Joe. If you don't go linebacker in round 1, it's slim pickings after that in terms of talent, but also in terms of fit for what you need for that spot. And the guys that are there's a lot of redundancy. Like if you're taking, you want to take Dorian Williams. Okay. You have Terrell Bernard. Isn't that kind of like the same thing? I worry about the fit for a lot of guys after the first round, which is why I'm focused on linebacker in round 1 and specifically Jack Campbell. But Darnell Wright would make me the happiest. Again, in terms of like you phrased it, who is possible. I actually think there's a situation where Darnell Wright isn't available. I like the idea of him going to Tampa Bay and the Bills or the Buccaneers are moving Tristan Wirfs to left tackle and you put Darnell Wright at right tackle. But Darnell Wright would make me the happiest in terms of who is possible at 27. I just love his skill set. I love his mentality, how he approaches the game. I love seeing him at the Senior Bowl. I love his tape. I love speaking to him at the Senior Bowl. Just seems like a high floor and a high ceiling guy. Oh, Justin comments here and says Van Ness is that guy for him. I don't think Van Ness is going to be there. I am actually interested to see what edges fall. Like, does Miles Murphy fall? Does Van Ness fall? Does Nolan Smith fall? Like, what edges go and where? Van Ness is an interesting one, and he also ticks the box in terms of what the Bills like from an edge rusher standpoint, like a big, strong, physical dude who can compress the pocket. I also think he's athletic enough that he does give you a little more juice on the edge, but he does tick a box. If he's there, I think he would be in strong consideration given the ceiling and then given his skill set and how it fits the archetype of what the Bills look for at edge. So very fair, very fair, very fair. I think, folks, it's going to do it for us here on this episode of Disguise Coverage as we start to wind down here. Before any of you folks leave, please, and thank you. If you haven't already, please drop a like on this video. Again, it goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes. So if you haven't dropped a like already, please drop a like on this video if you'd be so kind. I want to thank Joe Marino for joining me in this episode tonight. Super knowledgeable, super fun to talk ball with. And this is like the marriage of, best of both worlds for him, being able to talk Bills, but also being able to talk draft, both of those worlds that he lives in. Give him a check out if you haven't already, but I'm assuming most of you folks know. Ooh, awesome comment from Ralph. Ralph says the tree is popping and so did the show. I appreciate the comments for the show, or the appreciation for the show, but also, yeah, it's April, Easter, pastel colors for the tree. So light blue garland, light yellow garland, bang, pastel colors. The wife helped me decorate it. And when I say help, I mean my wife did the garland. Also got the pastel tree over there along with some Easter decor. There's also a little egg down there next to the Bills helmet. So we got a lot of pieces and in terms of Easter. So I'm glad you appreciate the tree, Ralph. Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind words that are coming in for myself and for Joe that came in along the way. Anthony's question is, what are you covering in the film room tomorrow? Myself and Eric will be diving into Bills college prospects that are rumored to have met with the Bills or are confirmed to have met with them in top 30 visits, or who the Bills met with at their pro days and had extended interviews or meetings with. So basically taking a look at some realistic targets that the Bills have met with in terms of breaking them down. So that's what's going to happen on the film room tomorrow. Again, thank you to Joe Marino for joining me. He was awesome. Check him out if you have not already. I got his information in the episode show notes here. Thank you to all you folks who rode with me live on this episode and rode with myself and Joe for the first half of the show. It's always a lot better to do these shows when you have a lot of live viewers and engagement. It just increases the engagement for the chat, but also with myself and my guest. It's just really cool to see all you folks who tune in. So thank you very much to everybody who joined live. Thank you for your questions, thoughts, comments, concerns. Thank you very much for the super chat donations that we had on this show. Morning Mayan, NFL Draft Fanatics, thank you very much for the super chat and for being here in general, but the kindness and the monetary donation means a lot. Thank you very much for that. If you didn't watch live and you're watching later on YouTube, that's fine. Thank you very much for your post-live view. It's greatly appreciated. If you're listening to this show on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, please rate and review and subscribe on whatever podcasting app or platform you are listening to. Ratings and reviews sincerely, especially if they're legitimate. Like, one, they just help the algorithm, but two, if you actually have legitimate constructive feedback or positive feedback, whatever, that's always appreciated. So please rate and review and subscribe on the audio platforms. Please drop a like here on YouTube. Please subscribe to the Cover One channel and to Disguise Coverage in particular here on YouTube. Bill says sometimes the likes can fluctuate, depends on what you're looking at and where you are. Bill says we're only at 43 likes. I hope that's not the case because we've been rolling with a ton of viewers here. If you folks would be so kind, drive up those likes, please, 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 and thank you. It would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you folks want to comment on the comments once the show is published on what you'd like to see in the show going forward as we get closer to the draft, feel free to do that as well. Appreciate all the kind words coming in for myself and the tree, and for Joe and everything along the way. Again, thank you to Joe Marino. Thank you to everybody who tuned in live. Thank you for all the post-live listens, downloads, views. Thank you very much to the sponsor, One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Get yourself some ASAP if you haven't. I'm not making it up. It is the best pizza in Buffalo, and their homemade blue cheese is even better. Ooh, I like the update in the likes. Amicus says 71. Chris says he sees 76. If we could jack that up and get it to over 100 in the next couple of minutes by the time I publish this, that would be greatly appreciated. I hate shilling out for that, but such is life. Oh, appreciate the kind words, RJ. RJ says, awesome show tonight, and the Sabres watch party was fun, even though the result was not. I had to leave the watch party early to come do the show. I heard what happened to the Sabres. I am disappointed. That's a conversation for another time. We will be back with the watch party on Thursday, so I appreciate you for that. We're going to get out of here. Enjoy your Tuesday night, folks, wherever you are in the world, or Wednesday morning. I know we get some overseas listeners. The weather's starting to turn if you live here in Buffalo, so enjoy the springtime weather that's starting to come through. That might be exciting. Oh, we're up to 91 likes. Let's keep it up. Keep it up. Please, please, please. And thank you. I appreciate you folks. Again, whatever form or fashion your support comes in, it is greatly appreciated by myself and the entire team. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. Or if you thought the show was terrible, try and tell your enemies about the show and try and ruin their day. Again, whatever form or fashion your support comes in, it's greatly, greatly, greatly appreciated. Myself and the entire team appreciate you folks more, legitimately more than you ever know. Myself, especially, I'm very thankful and grateful to have this platform. And it's really cool to see people tune in regularly to the show to listen to me talk about football and break down the Bills and the X's and O's and scheme, and then appreciate me for the way I break down the game. So it's awesome. Thank you, folks, very much. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you to Joe. I'm going to get out of here and go to bed because I am very sleepy. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns that I did not answer, leave them on the comments here on YouTube. And I'll answer you here on YouTube, or add me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro2_ANT. At me on Twitter, and I'll respond to you there, or DM me on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. Or if you're a member of the Cover One Premium Slack channel, message me on there, and I'll get at you there as well. That'll do it for us here on this show. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you next week, live Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern for another episode of Disguised Coverage. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.